All right. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Welcome to the J podcast. I am your host, Jahenns Lee Manigat. Yeah, I'm giving my government name. I don't know why. I just
Oh,
did it. But yeah, welcome back to another episode. Make sure to like and subscribe to the Fearless 68 Media Network. Do your homework there, guys. Just like, subscribe, share it. Uh, we're definitely loving the numbers that we're getting these last few weeks. They're going up and up and up. So keep doing that. I appreciate all the support as always. Today, a very special guest. Who isn't a special guest that comes into the J with me?
that's right.
He is a big time friend of the show. He's a co host of Scurry and the Scrub podcast. He is absolutely a key contributor for the White and Blue Review. I'm kind of going to admit that I've been reading and watching some of your stuff since I was in undergrad too, just to see what you have to say about me.
Thank you
He
for
is the
saying nice
one,
things. Yeah,
he is the one, the only Matt DeMarinis is in the J with me. Welcome back, brother. How are you doing?
man, it's always good to get the invite to be at the J. Normally you can just kick the door in and start drinking dollar beers, but they closed that part up. Now I have to wait for Jahenns to invite me. It's invitation only now, so I'm
Yeah,
happy to
it's
be on
invite
now.
only. It's invite only. I hope I make you feel special whenever you get that text from me. I always love having you on the show because obviously you're a beat writer, you're there for practices, you're really involved in not only the boys but all of the Creighton sports, and you do a
Yep.
really good job of reporting on all Creighton sports. So I
Oh,
know the knowledge that you have, and I always appreciate you taking time out to be in the J with me.
all right, that's enough buttering me up. Let's get down to
I,
it.
now
That is holy.
that's unfair. That's unfair. That is someone who is refusing to accept his flowers, and I will not have any of it. You are
Fair
accepting your
enough.
flowers today,
I'm
sir.
a little shy. I'm shy. I'm a shy personality, man. As outgoing as I am, it's too many compliments all at once. I'm sorry. I feel
Well,
weird. Thank you,
I,
though.
I'm
Appreciate you,
I'm
sir.
not gonna stop dishing them out today because honestly, like having been on this side, like I said, like I've mentioned in the different podcasts and episodes that you've been on with me, you're one of those guys who like behind the scenes have given me some tips and pointers. We talk about these kind of things all the time. I really take it to heart and I really appreciate like it's helped me become a better host. I hope, and like being on the media side of things, having been a player, it's kind of tough sometimes to be critical, but
Mm.
like sometimes you have to be. We're gonna have to be today because of the way the Jays have played these past six games, obviously. And it's tough because I'm a homer. I have big time biases, and sometimes I have to push it aside. And I know that you're a Jays fan as well as being a reporter for him, so you kind of feel the same thing that I'm feeling, right?
Yeah, so like the dynamic is interesting because you do have to, kind of put yourself in a different mind space at times. Like I grew up a Creighton fan basically all the way up through high school, right? And then as you get into the reporting side of things, you have to shut that part off and make sure you're just being honest, whether it's good or bad.
Mhm.
So it took a little bit of time to transition to that, but I feel like for the past 6, 7 years, I think I've found a pretty good groove with it. And for the most part, whenever I'm dishing out analysis, whether it's positive or negative, it's coming from a place of what I truly feel is an unbiased opinion. But the other part of it is too is like I'm very cognizant of it, at least so I can speak for myself in this regard. Is like, as bad as it gets sometimes in certain sports, I still feel like I try to be respectful, right? Like
Mhm.
they're human beings at the end of the day. They have flaws just like everybody else, you know what I'm saying? The only difference is what their shortcomings are in the spotlight. Whereas like if I screw something up or if someone else, a regular fan screws up at their job, no one's kind of watching that and analyzing that and breaking that down. So that's kind of why I get probably lumped into the homer crowd a little bit more than I would prefer as someone who's trying to maintain that middle ground because you do tend to try to find the glass half full perspective on things whereas opposed to most of the stuff you read in your mentions in your emails and your DMs is all about the sky is falling even when things are going kind of decently well. So yeah, that's kind of the game you have to play on the media side of things is finding that balance of being honest but not tearing people apart because at the end of the day they are human beings too. So it's kind of what I try to figure out.
having been a former player, I find it very difficult to find that balance. Like I always say, this is the
Yeah, I
most
bet.
biased, this is the
Yeah.
most biased Creighton podcast I think that there is out there. And I listen to the other guys too who are doing their thing, reporting on the Jays. It's just I find it really hard because I have these relationships with Coach Mack and the staff, and I get to practice with the boys in the summer. I meet them, I get to know
Hmm.
them on a personal level. So it's really hard for me to be critical. I always try my best not to, throw somebody under the bus or like mention a name that's not playing so well at the moment. I try my best to avoid it, but sometimes you just simply can't. And because if you do that too much, and it just kind of turns into like, okay, like
You're
this
not
guy's really
being
not
real.
reporting the
Yeah.
news at all, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
I hear you. I think
So
that no, I think you're doing a great job, honestly. Like if I can give you some flowers too, because there's a place where your passion resonates at a high level, and I enjoy listening to the show. I don't know if I would consider myself a day one. I think I'm a day one. I don't know.
day two,
I don't want to
maybe.
call my, I don't want to like rank myself. I don't know who's more passionate of the J podcast or not, but I consider myself a day one. So I would say there's very few um who have, are as passionate a listener as I am with you. So I do appreciate your perspective on things, and I think there's a really valuable place for it. So right now we find ourselves in the tough spot because we have to analyze
Yeah.
a team that's scuffling, right? To be fair, and we probably didn't feel like we were going to be talking about a 6 game losing streak with this team, but this is that's kind of what seasons are made of, man. You put them together and you outline what you think is a baseline expectation for a group, and then you kind of assess things based on how that goes according to it, right? So we kind of find ourselves here, wrapping up December talking about some things we probably didn't think we would be talking about, but that's kind of sports. That's the way it goes.
Not in my wildest dreams did I think that I'd be sitting here with you today talking about a 6 game losing streak. You're absolutely right about that. But it is where we're at. The Jays drop a Big East opening game at Marquette. Uh, I just want to start with a very simple question because we have to get into it. What is going on with this team right now? What is your
That's not a
assessment
that's a
as
simple
to
question. Oh my god.
I mean, to me, it is like
Yeah.
because there's a lot of different ways. I'm giving you the leeway to go into whatever direction you want to go
Yeah, you're giving me
with this one.
a lot of runway here. Um, you know, and I said this on the post game show too that we do. It's like I I don't think I was as pessimistic about what Vegas looked like as most people I was hearing from, just in terms of, when we ask for questions, it's very, I think people were more worn out by the basically from Nebraska on,
Well,
which is
from
fair. I
Arizona
understand. Yeah.
on, I think
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
most things that I see is, well, to be honest, the Texas game. I think people kind of forgave the Jays a little bit for the Arizona game. You lose by two in a
Yeah.
Maui Invitational. That can certainly happen, right? You play 3 games in 3 days. Boys are tired, shortened rotation, especially in that final game. Arizona comes out on fire, like big boy down low. Balo really took care of business against Kalkbrenner, which is something that I didn't think any of us expected to see. I think the Texas game is where fans started to really be like, uh-oh, like what is going on here? And I guess to their pessimistic credit, the Jays have kind of, haven't played up to snuff these last few games. So yeah, that's just the kind of reaction you're gonna get when you're just kind of sliding
Mhm.
down like that.
Yeah. No, and I don't begrudge anyone for that reaction either. My thing was I just felt like those losses weren't none of them were kind of created equal, and I'm just kind of looking for process oriented things more than I was looking for results. So I think once or Arizona and Texas are kind of in their own column, right? Those are games that I don't think you would I don't think you'd be giving Creighton a very fair chance to perform if you're saying those are must win games. Those are kind of toss up games, right? Like you're
Mhm.
playing elite teams. Arizona was the third game in 3 days. Texas was on the road. Um, after a short turnaround from Maui, and
Mhm.
then you look at and then you look at the Nebraska game, and that one was a little bit of alarm bells kind of going off because it looked like Creighton didn't want that game more than Nebraska did, and that's something we've talked about over the years too, because it's kind of been used as sort of a dig to Creighton's side of things in terms of why they've been so successful in that series is because Creighton takes that game far more seriously is kind of the rub there, and it's like, well, that's not a good that's not a compliment to your side of things when you're saying it like that. You should want that game as
Hmm.
bad as the other team does, right? It's a rivalry game. And it looked like and it sounded like in post game, the way Sam Griesel talked about what that game meant to him for the first time in a long time, it felt like Nebraska finally was able to channel that energy in terms of how important this game is to them, more so than maybe it was to Creighton. Creighton probably came in a little bit flat, maybe thought it was kind of a get right game after coming off of Arizona and Texas, right? And they got humbled in it. And then you go to Vegas and you take Kalkbrenner out of the mix, which
Hmm.
is, I think he's not only the most important player on Creighton's team, but probably one of the most indispensable players in the entire country. Um, so those losses kind of like, they bring new questions into the mix. Like, okay, what's the expectation level in those two games? Like, do you expect Creighton to beat those teams without Kalkbrenner? I think I expected them to beat BYU without Kalkbrenner. Although BYU is starting to play a little bit better, I still felt like Creighton was a level above them going into that game.
Hmm.
So I was surprised by how just, physically Creighton wasn't up to the task, especially from the jump. Like you should come in a little bit hungrier when you've lost three in a row than I think Creighton did to start that game. Now, to their credit, they fought their way back into it and gave themselves a chance to win it, right? So there's value in the fact that they didn't lay down and just, concede defeat without their big man. Then the Arizona State game, I think I came away a little bit more encouraged by their fight, especially on the defensive end in that game. I thought they were playing a better opponent, which is kind of why, what I chalked up to as to the reason why they fell short because you're playing, I think, a pretty good Arizona State team and you didn't have Kalkbrenner. So I think they played physically, they matched up out as well as they did. And I thought that the physical effort was there from Creighton side of things. So I came away a little bit more on the optimistic side of things leaving Vegas, right?
Hmm.
I did not feel that way after Marquette. I'm sorry, I just didn't. It was hard for me to find positives after the Marquette game. I just thought, just looking at things, it just feels like, and this word is very like I shudder to throw this word out because it's once you toss it out there, you can't reel it back in very easily. But it just feels like they're not this team for whatever reason right now is not doing the little things that don't show up in the stat sheet just innately. It's not like something, and that's kind of what unselfish basketball is about. It's not about assists. It's not about um, kind of wanting to compete hard for each other. It's just, will you set a ball screen that doesn't involve you in? Will you set an off ball screen that doesn't involve you in the action at all? Like you're not going to touch this rock. You're just setting a
Hmm.
screen to get a guy open, to switch a matchup on the weak side of the floor, to get things flowing. But you're not necessarily ever going to touch this ball. Will you back cut to create space to vacate a defender from that side of the floor? Will you dive on the floor for a loose ball, even though it's probably going to hurt? And it's probably not going to, and the tie up probably goes to the other team. Like, will you fight to switch that arrow? Um, I don't see that very much from this team, and that's a little bit concerning because you're going to get everybody's best shot on every given night, and we know that what the Big East is like. It's a bear of a league, right? Talent isn't you're not going to out talent people on any given night, right? So you have to be able to do those things as part of who you are as a team in order to be successful consistently. And I just don't see those things consistently. And that's kind of why I think, in some regard, they're getting the results they deserve because you have to be more unselfish in terms of doing the things that don't show up and won't show up on a stat sheet in order to
I
create the things that do show up on highlight reels and do show up on stat sheets and do lead to wins. And I just don't think they do those things either because they don't really, maybe they don't understand how valuable those things are, maybe,
Mhm.
or because they're unwilling. Those are the two options there. So it's kind of how I
I
feel.
what you're describing right now is what I like to call the tough things, right? So what you're saying is it feels like they're not doing the tough things, which is, standing there, take a charge. It's gonna hurt, but you might get the possession back. Or at the very least, you're gonna discourage the team from driving in there, understanding that, not only you have Cogburner back there, or King's been doing a pretty good job being thrown into the mix of defending the paint and altering shots. Not only do you have that threat, but also it might be an offensive foul against you. So that's not happening. You mentioned, diving on the floor for the loose ball, the back cuts, the hard screens off the ball, on the ball, rolling hard to the rim as opposed to rolling passively in order to create driving lanes for the other guy. So all these things, like you mentioned, I haven't really seen so
Defensively,
much.
what about the gaps defensively? Will you jump in the gap defensively? Will you dig at the ball in the post? Will you help close that off, knowing that you might eat a three, knowing that
Right.
your closeout is going to be hard? But or will you just guard your man and say my guy didn't score? Like that's the kind of stuff that you see from a team that just looks like it's not on the same page. But you have to be willing to do that stuff, even if you get cooked on the play, because you need to be connected. And it just doesn't feel like they're connected on either end of the floor right now. It feels like they're all just kind of taking turns trying to make a play, and that's kind of why they're in the rut they are in, I think.
I think the tough thing about that too is not having your defensive anchor in the middle, calling out everything. We see now really the importance of Kalkbrenner. You said he's maybe one of the most indispensable players in the country. Certainly on this Jays team, he's proven to be that. You're kind of in there every day. You have a closer, idea of what's going on with him. When can we expect him to come back? I haven't had a chance really to see post game stuff or the latest, news on him. So when can we expect Brennan to be back? And obviously, what kind of impact do you think he'll have once he steps foot back on the court with the Jays?
Well, obviously, the situation like that changes just based on how he feels on a daily basis. So, before they left for Milwaukee to play Marquette, he was, getting shots up in practice and kind of, riding the stationary bike to a good pace. Like they weren't by any means pushing him as hard as they normally would push guys that are out of practice, right? But
Mhm.
um, so it looks like he's kind of getting back together here. I haven't been to practice this week, but before they left from Milwaukee, the word was that he was going to play. He was going to be ready to play against Butler. I don't know what that looks like, how much his gas tank will be full at that point. Obviously, it might still be a process to get him back to 100%, but it sounds like it's safe to expect that he'll be back for Butler as long as this week went how last week was trending. So in that regard, it'll be certainly a positive because having him back on the floor in any capacity. I mean, we saw what it looked like. He wasn't even 100%. Against Nebraska, Texas, Arizona. Who knows how long in Maui when they were all kind of fighting some sickness there. He was still able to be quite effective, even though he wasn't necessarily looking 100%. So having him back in any kind of capacity is a net positive for the Jays. What they've missed without him is just that guy who will. I mean, he's for a 7-footer, he has a pretty good gas tank, right? Like that's
Mhm.
something he's worked really hard on clearly because he's active on both ends of the floor and he changes the game at the rim on both ends of the floor. Normally, it's kind of a give or take, right? Um, your best shot blocker isn't necessarily your best rim runner because you can't get down the floor in time, and he's also not very active in ball screens because he's kind of tired from playing defense. So
Yeah.
it's just, but he's different, right? He can do all those things, and he's kind of the point of attack, the big linchpin and the point of attack for Creighton's offense because he'll set those ball screens, he'll set re-screens, he'll flip screens around, and he'll constantly set those to kind of create advantages in matchups or and he's turned into a little bit of a pick and pop option where he can step out and hit a three every now and then. But he also is a guy that you don't have to throw a perfect pass on those
He'll go
slips to the
get it.
rim. He'll go
He'll
get
go
it.
get
You know
it.
what I mean? Like he can get higher than anyone that he plays against, and he's usually going to come down with that. And at the rate he's finishing at the rim, it's going to be hard to alter it. So
Mhm.
he changes the game in that regard, and then he changes the game with the way because he's not just a typical shot blocker where he'll sell out for to try to swat that thing into the stands. Like you saw one key possession against Arizona State, Fredrick King, who's a freshman. The freshman center has been playing really well, but one thing that's a big difference between him and Kalkbrenner is their ability to block shots without selling out. And
Yeah.
one play that was key against Arizona State was
Offensive
King
feedback.
King King selling out for that shot, that block shot that he didn't get, and he left
Mhm.
Baylor Shireman with a 2-on-1 block out on the other side of the rim, and Arizona State got
Right.
a easy stick back to tie the game there. Huckmanner doesn't have to sell out for block shots like that. He's just there. He's there on time, and he just uses his length. And if he jumps, it's just straight up and down. It's not really selling out to get out of position. So those are kind of the subtle things that make a difference, right? Because you're erasing shots at the rim on one end without taking yourself out of the play, where you can still be there to block out and get a rebound. And then on the other end, you're finishing plays that no one else on your team could finish because like we said, you can throw that pass. It doesn't have to be perfect, and he can come up with it and finish it at the rim. So there's all sorts of things that it's a large ripple effect when he's on the floor versus when he's not.
He certainly makes some of those passes look good for sure. Because I've seen him reach back, come down on balance, maybe dip his shoulder into the center, and then finish with that little baby hook. Or if the pass is accurate, he could just keep both hands high and just finish it. Never bringing the ball back down. So, yeah, it's certainly a key aspect of the game that the Jays have been missing offensively. Another thing too, going into this year that I didn't think we'd struggle in as much as we did last year was scoring the ball effectively. The Jays haven't been over that magic number 75. That number has been the magic number, the Godfather's number. I like to call it the
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 Godfather.
Rosperini number, as we love to call it. The Jays have only done that once in this 6 game losing stretch, and that was that very first game against Arizona that they lost in Maui. Since then, the Jays have not been able to get over 75. I think they only scored 69, if I'm not
They scored
mistaken.
80 against BYU. 83. It was
Oh,
83-80 against BYU.
so
Yeah.
twice. See, that's why we have you on the show. I need to be corrected for sure.
So
Talk to me about obviously like those offensive struggles, and even though Kalkbrenner's been out, he is their leading scorer. If you look at a per game average standpoint, Kalkbrenner is their leading scorer right now. But
mm,
with so much NBA type of talent that these guys have on the team, you would think that other guys would be able to step up and kind of cherish the fact that, hey, I'm gonna get more shots and more opportunities coming my way, and really step up in these moments when Kalkbrenner's been out. But the Jays have really struggled to put the ball in the hoop. Why do you think that is? Obviously, we kind of talked about Kalkbrenner's presence and effect on the team, but what are some other things that you think the Jays could do to get some easier baskets out there and just kind of get the ball rolling a little bit offensively?
yeah, well, I mean, if anyone's going to figure out, it's going to be Greg McDermott. So that's one thing I'll caution there is, he's not going to continue to stick a square peg in a round hole. He's going to make some adjustments if necessary. So the thing that I think is interesting about this team is they don't have quite the shot creation that I just I don't know if it was last year's team had more shot creation. I certainly think this team has more shot creation, but they just haven't been able to do it consistently.
Mhm.
And the other part of it is when they have created good shots, they haven't shot the ball well. So there's there's kind of some weird things at play right now because I'm not really sure who this team is on the offensive end yet. And the identity has certainly shifted a lot without Kalkbrenner too, because I think it would be easier to say here's who they are offensively, play through the big man. Whether it's in ball screens or whether it's in post ups, however you have to do, whatever you have to do to get him the ball and get him involved,
Mhm.
that will create good things offensively. So without him, that changes things a little bit. When you look at Francisco Farabello, and I think, he shot the ball really well against Nebraska, right? But if you take
Right.
away
The,
that
on-
five for
the
nine,
only one who shot the ball well against Nebraska, to be honest.
exactly. Yeah. So if you take away that 5 for 9 game for him, he's shooting about 20% from three. That's not that's a red light. You know what I'm saying? You can't be,
Mhm.
that's just chucking bricks essentially. Um, Trey Alexander's at 40% on about 3.2 attempts a game, 3.1 attempts per game. So it's relatively low volume, but it's efficient. So maybe he needs to be a guy who takes more shots.
Mhm.
Uh, Baylor Shinerman is about 38%. So he's down a bit from last year, which was absurd at 47%. I don't think anyone in their right mind should have expected a one-to-one replication there. But he's pretty efficient at 38% on about 8 attempts per game. So he's a guy who you need to find shots for, right? Arthur Kaluma, Ryan Nemhard. Um, Nemhard had a really good shooting stretch in Maui, but if you take away the Maui rims, it hasn't been good either from
Those Maui
three.
rims have been notorious for being shooters' rims, very soft
That's
at
so let's
attacking.
just be honest, right? Like they had a shooter friendly situation in Maui. So if you take
The
those
Maui
performances
rims are
away,
about as well known as to be friendly as the Maui floors are to be slippery. There
there you
is about
go.
a 1-to-1
Yeah,
ratio
there you
there.
go. Yeah, it's a give and take there. Exactly. So yeah, you take those games away and he's struggling from three. And you don't really know what that looks like consistently. Arthur Kaluma is another guy who's had kind of a handful of shooting games and a handful of clunkers. So there's some streakiness there. So I just don't know, should this team be as dependent on the 3-point shot as they have been? That's a question I'm not sure is so easy to answer based on maybe what they see in practice because it hasn't been there consistently in games, right? Or they've certainly had some large variance. Let me say that because they have had quite a few games where they've shot the ball well, but they've also had quite a few games where they've shot the ball absolutely horrid, right? So there's
Right.
the range, the floor and the ceiling are a lot different there, or there's a big gap. So that creates some question marks in terms of who they are offensively and what you can expect on any given night. Um, and until they get Carpenter back, I'm just not sure what the adjustment is, because you don't want to change, you don't want to make a holistic change to the style of play if you're going to get the 7-footer back in good health and then be able to, throw him into it, right? So
Mhm.
maybe you wait until Carpenter's back, assess a few more games, and then make a decision on what the performance looks like because 12 games is a small sample size, but for college basketball, it's a third of the season basically. So you have to be very careful about reacting appropriately. You might not want to overreact to a 10-game, 12-game sample in a normal sense, but also when you find yourself at 6-6 and you jump into Big East play and you kind of start to see your margin for error shrink a little bit because of some of your deficiencies that are being exploited. And then you realize, well, forget Final Fours and national titles and all that stuff that we were talking about a month ago. How do we make the NCAA tournament, right? So
Right.
you do have to make some adjustments eventually, pretty soon here, really, to flip this thing in one direction, in a positive direction. So that's kind of where they're at right now. I do think we're getting close to crossroads time because they have 3 games at home here before they have to go to UConn and Xavier back to back, and it feels like these are must win. Like
You
I
should
don't
host this
know
show because I was literally about to say these next games I don't feel like I must wins
what
for
would they
the
feel like
day.
to you, Jay. Like tell me, like that's
A,
why I'm
a
glad you're
thousand percent, a
right.
thousand percent must wins in my
It's
opinion
desperation mode,
because
isn't it?
the boys haven't given themselves enough of a leeway here, having lost 6 in a row. Now let's just say we flip the script a little bit. Let's say they're even what they played 12 games, they're 8-4,
Mm-hmm.
right? The adjustments that you're talking about in that situations, they can make an adjustment, see what works, see what doesn't. If they happen to drop that game because of those adjustments, then they have a pretty good idea of, hey, this isn't going to work. Let's go back to what we've been doing that has been successful because we're 8-5 now. Being 6-6, we're talking about in that large bid here. And the Big East is not going to give you any games at home or on the road, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I'm looking at obviously Butler coming in. That's going to be a really tough matchup. Butler is notoriously known for being well coached, tough, gritty kids who are going to do the tough things that we talked about earlier in the show. Then you have DePaul at home. DePaul hasn't really been really good, in these recent years. But the way the Jays are playing right now, they can afford to look at down on anybody. So those are that's like a trap game that you're really trying to avoid at this point in your season because it could really bring the morale down if they so happen to lose that game. So these next 2 games, this next little homestand that they got, and especially playing DePaul on Christmas, that is a
Mm-hmm.
definite must win, in my opinion, because the fans are going to be hyped. When's the last time we had a Christmas game at home? I don't quite remember.
I
It
don't think
might have
there's
been
ever
the
been one in my
pandemic year,
life.
but there wasn't a
Yeah.
lot of fans in the stands that year. So we're really going back to maybe even like 2017, 2018 season.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so yeah, this is a really tough situation that they find themselves in, and as much adjustments as I'm sure Coach Mack has the brain to figure out, I'm just trying to think about, is this the right situation to do so? Like we said, we don't know what's going on with Cockburger right now. We don't want to make wholesale changes and then have him come back and then have to reset the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tough spot. I don't envy the coaching staff for, where they are at right now, but these games are about as must win slash season saving, perhaps pessimistically season ending for the
I mean,
Jays if they're not able to make it.
yeah, I mean, I know how you're wired, and you know how Marcus Zagorowski's wired, right? Like
Mhm.
we were talking, after the Texas game because that's when he was on the post game show with me after the Texas game, and
Okay,
I
wait.
think
I,
he
I
was
know I
knocking.
know what you're about. I know what you're about to get into. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to say because you and I were texting after that game, right?
Yeah,
And you said something that Marcus said, and I didn't want to steal it and say it on the podcast. I tried my hardest because this is a very intelligent, smart observation on Marcus's standpoint, which I think is what you're getting to, correct? And I was like, damn, I wish I thought that myself because I would have said so bad. But it's his take. And obviously, like you spoke about it
mm-hmm.
on your program. And now the fans who are fans of this show who have not had a chance to listen to you are going to hear what you were talking about. So I'm going to give you the floor now. I just had to let you know that I did
Yeah,
not steal the take. This is
it's all good.
Marcus's take, and I
Yeah.
didn't want to take credit away from him.
Well, he's just got it. I mean, he's got a unique mindset, right? And he's
Mhm.
before anything else that you evaluate with him in terms of how skilled he is, or what he can do on the floor. Like it's his mentality that changes, that separates him from other people, right? And he's not normal. It's a very unusual personality, but he's psychotically driven as a competitor, right? And coming out of Arizona and Texas, I think there was probably a feel good aspect to those losses because it's you're playing. Texas was ranked second in the country and they were at home.
Right.
um
And you shoot the
Arizona
ball like
again,
crap that
yeah.
day, and you're still
Yeah, so it's
in the
like,
ball game.
yeah, you lost by 7 points to two highly ranked teams, the teams that are probably going to be second weekend teams. You can kind of like, okay, those are performances that aren't alarming, right?
Mhm.
Marcus was more alarmed than I think I should have given him credit for at the time because he felt like that Nebraska game was a must-win game. Because he's like, you have to go in with the mentality that two straight losses is unacceptable.
Mhm.
And that caught me off guard a little bit because it's like, well, it's our Arizona and Texas. Like, those aren't unacceptable losses. But to him, and the way he's wired as a competitor, you have to be like, we've lost two straight. We can't let that be three.
Right.
And that was his mentality. And that's how
Well,
he analyzed that. And then they come in, they lay an egg against Nebraska. So now you're like, now you're super alarmed. And you're just like, and now you're wondering, were there habits in the offseason that were kind of established that are leading to some of this stuff? And then you pair three more losses on top of it. And now you're like, okay, maybe maybe this isn't just what's going on in the season. Maybe this is type of stuff that's bleeding over from the offseason. And you kind of wonder, big picture, what this team did to prepare itself for this gauntlet, right? So now you've lost 6 games in a row, and it feels like it's not even a question anymore that these next 3 games, especially in your own gym,
mhm.
that if you have any pride, right? And I hate saying this because it feels like you're questioning the stuff you shouldn't be questioning, right? But if you've Jahenns Manigat, if you've lost 6 games in a row, and I'm telling you, you have 3 in a row in your own gym. I don't care who the opponent is.
Mhm.
You're not sleeping, man. You're thinking about like getting that next win so badly. It's all that it matters to you, right?
Absolutely.
That's
And
the
the
mentality they have to have for these next 3 because you can't go to UConn and Xavier and expect UConn and Xavier to feel bad for you. They're going to put the nail in your coffin. They're going to bury you. So you better get
especially
yourself right.
UConn.
Yeah. So you better get yourself right when you have games in your own gym, and you can at least be a little bit comfortable in the setting.
Mhm.
So you better
The
get yourself
the
right because no one else is going to feel bad for you if they get their hands on you.
the one thing that Marcus talked about, obviously, which you know, what I took from what he was saying is, I don't know if this is what he meant, but this is what I took from it. We kind of take for granted a little bit that Nebraska game is a must-win game because we stress it so much. Oh, it's a must-win game, it's a must-win game, it's a must-win game. We say it every single year. You have to win that Nebraska game. Just one for bragging rights. Two, obviously, it affects your record for sure. Three, our fans like that. That's one of the most. It might be the most watched game in the state all year long. Like
Mm-hmm.
Nebraska Creighton volleyball might be the next big thing after that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like you talked about a little bit of like having that pride, that personal pride. We lost two in a row. We can't let it be three. We can't let it be three on top of the fact that it's Nebraska in our gym.
Right.
And that
Eh,
is the point that
Jahenns, how
Marcus
old are
made
you? How
that
old are you,
really
Jahenns? How old are you?
31 years old
So
now.
what year were you born then? You were 90.
91.
Okay. They hadn't beaten Creighton in Omaha in a regular season game since 1995. That's how long it'd been.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can't let that happen, especially when you've lost 2 in a row. Regardless if it's
Mhm.
Texas, Arizona, and you feel good about the performances, you 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 had to approach that game differently. And then now,
Well,
so now now you've added three more losses to it. It's just like your mentality has to be desperation mode. You have to
I
be
talked
desperate.
about this a little bit last week with Fullertino when he was on the program. And we talked about like how our teams in the Valley kind of had a like my sophomore and junior year, especially in February, for whatever reason, no matter who was in front of us, we had like a 3 game losing streak.
Mhm.
We couldn't figure out why it was or whatever. Uh, that didn't happen to us my senior year. Like, I guess we figured it out, whatever it was. Like, we still just couldn't put our finger on it. But it is the roller coaster of the season. Like, there are ups and downs, there are lulls, there are ebbs and flows in every season. I think the Jays are obviously going through that. It's just so, it's under a microscope so much because of all the talent that we have, on the team. And, talking to some of the alumni guys around me, we're still texting here and there whenever the games goes on for sure. Like, there's a group of us texting, and are you watching the game? What are the boys doing? A great shot by so and so. Those conversations we're having. I think lately it's been kind of like, we talked about doing the tough things. That's where those conversations have been leaning. So, you're not the only person that's kind of questioning the pride and, the willingness to be unselfish in all aspects of the game. This is the thing that all Creighton fans, alumni who are still paying attention to the games, that's the opinion that they have as well. So yeah, these are absolute must-win games for the boys. You said just a 3-game homestand, right? They need to really buckle up here and come ready to win, or else, like we said, I'm already seeing stuff on Twitter, which is never a great barometer of how you should feel about anything. But like some of the main comments are more or less like, how do we go from like a natty championship hopeful to like first weekend, if not making it, like that's how most people feel. So boys, if you're listening to this is a chance for you to prove a lot of doubters wrong right now. A lot of
It's
people are
crazy how
doubting
quick
the
it happened,
team.
right? All of a sudden, the world's against
It's
you. Yeah, it
but
happened
like
so
you said,
fast.
a
Yeah.
12-game season, which is where we're at right now, is a
Mm-hmm.
third of the season for real.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you don't have a lot of these chances. This is not an 82-game NBA schedule where you have a chance to, like, as much as the Lakers haven't looked good, they still have 50 some games to play. Like, they
Yeah.
have a chance to turn things around if they play better.
And the other
And
part
you
of it
just
is
don't have that
too,
kind
and I
of
know you.
runway.
The other part of it is too, and I know you know this because you experienced it as a player,
Mhm.
where, and I can't tell you how many times it's happened in my lifetime of watching Creighton basketball over, from the Dana Altman years all the way through the Mac years now. I started following the team basically when Dana got hired. I think I saw a handful of Rick Johnson games, but nothing where I could understand what was going on. I was too young.
Mhm.
So, but time and time again, Creighton has always found a way to win a game no one thinks they're going to win when their back's against the wall. I just
Yep.
don't. I think that's been the one thing that for some reason the program, whoever's the players that have been a part of it, they've taken enough pride to come out when you think the chips are down as much as they can be down, right? And they find a way to pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and get things back on track. That's what this team. This is the question now that this team has to answer because other teams have answered it. They've lost. They lost to Arizona State last year and then dog walked Villanova a couple nights later, right? That's not supposed to happen.
Damn,
You're not
I
supposed to lose to
forgot
Arizona
about that.
State and then beat Villanova going away, right? But
Handily
that's
beat Villanova.
handily beat them. Like walk them off the
Mhm.
floor, pack their bags, send them on the bus. Like thank you for coming. So that's the kind of thing that Creighton's program has been built on. Is there's been up and downs. They've gone through slumps, like you said. Your teams, kind of had a February, January swoon, late January swoon every now and then, but then they would come through, beat a team they're not expected to beat because they haven't been playing well, and then everything's
Mhm.
back on track. That's how quickly it changes. But it feels like the mentality of the group is what brings it through because you come into the game with this mentality that no one thinks anything good of you anymore and you have to prove yourself all over again. That's
Mhm.
the situation Creighton faces right now. And they did some of these exact same players did it last year. So it's there. They're capable of
That
it. They lost
that
Ryan
is
Nemhard
what.
and then they had to face what UConn, Marquette, Seton Hall, and
Mhm.
to get themselves in the NCAA tournament, and they got themselves in the NCAA tournament, made it all the way to the Big East championship game, smoked Providence. Like they're capable of it. So it's not a question about if they can do it or not. And that's why you're curious, like, how did they get to 6? Because you
That is
should have,
what's
because
so
that
amazing to
mentality
me.
should have showed itself before, right?
That's what's so amazing to me because like these guys come back having played such big games, each individually having such big moments. Kaluma down the stretch last year, All American, an absolute stud, All American. Trey Alexander down the stretch last year, especially how he started the season, how he started the season to how he ended it, having played a
Mm-hmm.
totally new role. Nemhard goes down, he's the main ball handler on the team. these guys figure it out and they win, they win, they win. They lose in the Big East, championship game to Villanova and was right there to win it. They lose to the eventual national championship in Kansas. They were right there to win it. You know, we talked about a little bit about like the shot creation, whether or not they have more. They have more of that this year than they did last year, in my opinion, because you
Mm-hmm.
know, love to Hawkins, love to
Reef's
O'Connell, but
back.
these guys
Like,
weren't
yeah.
setting themselves
Yeah.
up the way that these guys can. I think the
Mm-hmm.
best shot creating team in the last decade that I remember. I don't think my teams were any part of it, but I think the Maurice Swass and Marcus Foster team is definitely up there. And the Zagorowski Tyson Alexander team
Mm-hmm.
that couldn't play because of COVID in the NCAA tournament was certainly up there. This team is up there with those teams as far as individual talent, being able to break a guy off, get into your pull up, get into your bag, get into your package,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just it hasn't materialized itself, and it kind of leaves us wondering why is it hasn't. It's a lot of questions that we don't necessarily have answers for, but I guess we could still wonder.
Yeah. And that's what we do. That's what our job is to do, is to
I mean,
wonder.
our job is to wonder. Well, a bright spot for the Jays for sure. We've mentioned his name a couple of times. Fred King. He just won, Big East Freshman of the Week for his past performances this week. That is, I guess, the lone bright spot for a team that saw six in a row. We had Kalkbrenner on earlier this year, and he talked about what he expects from Fred being a backup center, which is a spot that Kalkbrenner was when Christian Bishop was wearing a Jays uniform before he switched over to Texas. And Fred, I think, has really done about as much as you can expect a freshman center to do in this situation that he's been thrown into. With that being kind of a bright spot for the Jays, how impressed have you been with his play and his performances? The Jays try to go small in Vegas to kind of get a different look, and then they kind of stuck true to who they are, which is having a big guy in the middle to anchor things offensively and defensively. What have you seen from him these last couple of games? What does it mean to him to win that award? And what are your expectations for him moving forward, especially with hopefully the re-addition of Kalkbrenner into the lineup soon?
Yeah, I don't know what it means to him to win that award, but I know these performances have got to be huge for a freshman. Like, I can't imagine, if you talk about having double doubles against Arizona State and Marquette back to back like that, when you probably didn't feel all that comfortable, especially when you looked at how he played against BYU, like, it didn't look like he was comfortable, right? It didn't look like he
Mm-hmm.
had things figured out. So that's big for him, and it's also big for the ceiling of this team, because when you do get Kalkbrenner back, now you have a legitimate 1-2 punch at the five spot where you don't have to go small and compromise yourself on the defensive glass, or you can only you can mix and match based on how you feel the matchup goes, not how you feel like you have to match up to your opponent. So it's big for Creighton, it's big for Fred. I think the thing that's changed with him maybe is just, and it's something that Max said in the post game that feels like a small thing, but I think it's not. And he said Fred doesn't really care about his stats, he just kind of works.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of like the mentality this team should adopt right now, because it does look like there's maybe some guys out there that are affected by how involved they are, especially on the offensive end of the floor. If they're not getting touches, if they're not hitting shots, it does seem to sap their performances quite a bit. So for Fred, a guy who's just kind of out there, who has to set a lot of ball screens, who has to be involved in the offense and kind of get it flowing at that point of attack, and then he has to be able to finish at the rim at a high level, right? Because that's what Kalkbrenner did. So you feel like to give yourself, for him, he probably feels like to give my team a chance, I have to work really, really hard, because my skill development probably isn't where it needs to be to match what Kalkbrenner brought on the floor. So I just got to
Mm-hmm.
outwork my guy and make sure I'm working hard for my team and doing the things that don't always show up on the stat sheet, right? We talked about that. So I think that's kind of like, when you do that kind of thing, it's amazing. And Max says it all the time. He said it for years. It's amazing how the ball will find you and good things will happen if you're doing those things. You know what I mean? If you're just
Yeah.
out there playing the right way, how the ball will find you and how easy the game will look in on film, right? And that's kind of what it looks like right now. He's crashing the glass, he's protecting the rim, he's setting screens, he's re-screening, he's fighting for loose ball. There was one possession against Marquette where, and I know Creighton isn't a great, doesn't really sell out to rebound on the offensive end of the floor, but there was a possession against Marquette where the game was kind of out of reach essentially, but he's 1 on 4. You know what I'm saying? He's fighting with 4 Marquette guys for a loose ball, and it's a battle. Where's everybody else? Where That's a play that stands out to me. Like, why is your true freshman center, who's kind of just wide-eyed baby deer right now and experienced everything for the first time, why is he the one sticking his nose in there only and trying to make things tough on the other team? Those are the tough plays, right? We talked about that. Why is the true freshman center the one that's doing that without thinking twice? That should be everybody else think without thinking twice. So that's the kind of stuff that I think Fred has done these last couple of games to be successful. Just not thinking, simplifying the game, not trying to do too much, but just, working hard, trying to make the plays that those toughness plays, and it's translated into eye-popping stat sheet numbers because he's finishing at the rim well, he's getting to the right spots in ball screens, and he's rebounding on the defensive glass. So that it just adds up. You know what I mean? When you do all that stuff, it adds up. It shows up. It's not hard to notice, especially when you're looking for it. But it just feels like not enough players are doing that right now. And then you just kind of wonder why.
One thing that his performance has really made me think about is, I always give Nick Bach credit for saying this when he's on the broadcast, is that, his expectations of Fred was that he's going to be a backup guy, maybe play 8 to 10 minutes ish, sell out while you're out there because you have no reasons to conserve your energy and everything like that, right? And as far as Kalkbrenner is concerned, when he comes back into the lineup, when you know that you have a freshman backing you up, you sometimes have the tendency of like pacing yourself a little bit and going in spurts because you know that the team is going to depend on you to play 30 some minutes because the coaching staff might not trust a freshman just quite yet. Or, even maybe the team, as much as we don't like to express that or acknowledge that, we understand who the big dogs are and the freshmen are really there to give us a blow, see what they can do. If they have a good game, leave them out there. If they don't, you can always go back to your traditional lineup that you have. But I think that this evens out the playing time a little bit. I'm not saying Matt go 2020 with your 2 5s, but I think you made a really good
Yeah,
point when
right.
you say that, this could be a 1-2 punch at the 5 where like now this time Carpenter maybe plays 27 minutes and you get a really good 13 minutes from Fred in that game. And instead of having that lull in the middle of your defense, and obviously as a rim diver, rim runner guy offensively, you have two guys who are going, pardon my French, balls to the wall, attacking as much as they can, not conserving any energy, putting pressure on the defense to make sure they get back, putting pressure on their offense when you're on defense to make the right reads offensively because you have two guys who could clean up, box out, get defensive rebounds, and get the pace pushing again. So I've very much enjoyed what I've seen from him in the last couple of games, and obviously, I just hope that he's able to continue it.
He's a bright spot for sure, no doubt about it.
We need a spark or something, bro. I'm telling you, it's tough, man, and that's been the toughest thing too. Like watching and paying attention to these games. You try to do it from an objective perspective, like we talked about earlier in the podcast.
Yeah.
It's really hard, man. It's difficult.
Well, the part about being objective too is when you watch a 6 game losing streak, there's not a lot of good to say usually. So you try
Mhm.
to figure out, well, you know, how bad is it truly? And like I said, I don't feel like any of these losses are created equal, but when you look, it's hard to find a whole lot to feel great about when you watch the things that led to the Marquette loss, right? Like
Right.
you you had a stretch of both halves. It just unraveled the last basically at their under 12 timeout. It unraveled. They 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 Marquette went on like a 21-4 something like that run. After the under 12 timeout, and you're looking at how many live ball turnovers Creighton had and how many
Mhm.
just run out dunks like Marquette was able to get off that. You can't defend that stuff. That's easy points you're handing a team that doesn't have problems scoring in the first place, right? Marquette's good offensively.
Right.
So then you look at the second half where Creighton seemed to get things going a little bit. They started hitting some shots, and then they're down 8. They're kind of within striking distance again, and then here come live ball turnovers again. Where you're just kicking the ball
Ooh.
away at 30 feet and handing the other team, an uncontested
Two on
layup
one
or a dunk. Yeah,
opportunities. Yeah.
yeah. And it's like you get down 8, and then you get I think Nemhard had a steal where he went down and left a layup like right at the teeth of the rim, like didn't go up hard. And then Farabello had a play in transition where he got a corner three look, and instead of slowing down and taking a dribble sidestep and letting that thing rip, he jumped early and traveled. Like those are
Mhm.
points you're taking away from yourself on easy opportunities in the open floor, on top of the fact that you gave Marquette some easy points with your live ball turnovers. So it just felt like at some midway through those first and second halves, Creighton just hurt itself too much, and you can't do that. And that's kind of how the game got out of hand in both halves, really. So you're just kind of you look at that stuff and you're like, well, where's that's now your sixth straight loss, and that's how you lost the game. Like, what do you take away from that in a positive manner? It's just hard to find. Like, Fred King is the one bright spot right now. Other than that, it's really difficult to highlight certain things that are going well for the Jays right now. It doesn't feel like there's many more, if any.
Well, the other bright thing is it can only go up from here.
You
It
hope
can't,
it's
it can't,
yeah,
it can't really get lower than this, boys. It can't really
yeah.
get lower than
You're like,
this.
well, this
Like,
feels like rock bottom. That's what maybe that
and
mentality.
that
Yeah,
again, that's the thing that I have such a hard time with is, it feels like rock bottom, but there's still plenty of basketball left to be played.
yeah.
Uh, Big East doesn't give you any free games for sure. And I think honestly that might be a good thing for the boys because you can't take any games for granted from here on out. You've already kind of squandered that, random loss in January, that random loss in February, maybe a 2 or 3 games losing streak in February, like we used to have. You've kind of squandered that opportunity with this past month, essentially. So,
Mm.
every game from here on out, they need to think of it as like we're 0-0. We have to win this game to be 1-0. I believe if they go into every game with that mindset and really pay attention to that, then obviously they're gonna get themselves a better opportunity to win these games, even though it's going to be really tough. Like we said, Butler is up at home. That's tomorrow. After that, they have that Christmas game against DePaul, and we'll just kind of
Mm.
reassess it and see where we go from there.
It
But
does feel,
there's no other
yeah,
place.
it feels like their season's on the line right now because you have three
Mhm.
games at home, and none of them are against teams that you feel like are in the NCAA tournament right now. So, so in terms of how it looks for the Big East, and I'm not saying there's any like must or should win games in the Big East, right? But these feel like three. You know, you get Butler, DePaul, and Seton Hall in your own gym when they're basically, you know, on the outside looking into the NCAA tournament right now. You got to win those games,
Right.
especially
And
because
you'll feel better
especially
about
with UConn
yourself
and Xavier on the other
afterwards
end of it.
too.
Like that's what I mean. The
Yeah.
two roadies on the other end of it, those teams are really good. So
Uh,
don't make the path harder for yourself. Take care of business at home. Come out with that mentality that there is no tomorrow kind of thing that other Creighton teams have been able to cultivate. Like I said, you guys know what it's like to have your back against the wall, don't
mhm.
you? Like when no one else thinks you got a shot to win this game and that your season's over already, and then you come out and pull the win, and then the positivity just reigns, and then you go on a roll, right? You know what that's like, but you got to start. You got to take that into your own hands first, right? Because other people can't follow you unless you're leading. So Creighton's got to win these games. That's what it feels like. This is a pivotal point of their season. They haven't won in a month, and if you start stacking losses together, all of a sudden you forget how to win.
Whew.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So like,
Man, I'm laughing right now because God, as much as I love basketball, I hate it so much sometimes. I
it is
freaking
love
hate
hate.
this sport because it's like, the momentum could swing, like the pendulum is
Mm-hmm.
forever swinging in a direction or another. It never really just kind of settles in the middle. And that is a very tough thing to deal. I'm been a professional athlete now for 9 years. Thank God. I can't even believe as I'm saying that, like that's a
Blessed
reality.
life.
But having been a collegiate athlete, you feel it. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
it's so weird walking into classes, especially on campus where you're the big dog on campus. No matter the success that these teams have had around us, women's volleyball, unfortunately, they had an early bout in the NCAA tournament, but they were a very formidable team all year long. Men's soccer, we see what they're doing on campus. Women's basketball, we see what they're doing on campus, right? But everybody still looks at men's basketball as like the cream of the crop, I guess, of our team sports. And that there's good that comes with that, and there's bad that comes with that. When you're playing well, everybody loves you, obviously. But when you're walking to that psychology class at 9:30 a.m. and you just lost to Evansville on the road, I'm telling you, it's not a good.
Yeah, you're on
It's
your
not
own
a
there.
good
Yeah,
feeling. Your teacher
yeah,
is asking you what the hell is
yeah.
going on. So
You know
yeah,
what the other part
it's
of it is?
tough.
The other part of it is too, and I know you understand this because you tell me all the time you would kill to have one game back, like just one more, you know? And I think
I
that's
still
what,
have those dreams.
yeah, I think that's what TBT did for you this summer, right? Like that, just
Hmm.
that feeling of putting on a Creighton jersey again and feeling the home crowd like backing you in a big game. Like it, it's, it's a feeling that you can't simulate, that it's hard to just feel, and you can't get it
Hmm.
back once it's gone. You don't get those days back. And that's the other thing that Marcus talked about after the Texas game, which again, it felt like he was maybe a go like this was just, his mindset, but
His
you can't
mentality
take
is
this stuff
just
for
so
granted.
different, man.
Yeah,
Right.
you can't take this stuff for granted because these days go by fast.
Mhm.
These years go by. Your Creighton career is over before you know it. It really is.
And
I've
and he
talked to
didn't even
so
get a
many
chance to
guys
enjoy
who,
that senior year. Like I know where he's
mm-mm,
coming from because I know
yeah,
he had to go after his junior year. Like his stock
yeah,
wasn't going to get any higher, in my opinion. I think he felt that too. So I bet he sometimes like sits down and he's just like, man, what if I came back that last year? I know he
mhm,
misses that home crowd feeling. You don't quite get that anywhere else. And I know the NBA is its own animal, but there's nothing like a diehard fan base who has like stock in your ability to win or lose games. Like
mhm,
you only
mhm,
get that at the college level. And I just don't think like the NBA professional level, as great as some of those crowds are, especially in the playoffs, obviously, I just don't think you get that feel of a shortened NCAA season where every game matters, where fans are sitting on the edge of their seat every single game and live and die with the decisions that are made on the floor. I just
yeah,
don't think you
yeah.
get that. So I feel like that is also why he probably has that mentality too.
But it's the mentality that he wants to see from that group too. Because if you're, you don't get those games back. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're talking about all this NBA stuff coming into play in April and um, May and June, right? You only have 20 games left then, if you think about it.
Jesus, that's
That's what I'm
crazy.
saying. That's what I'm saying. This stuff feels like you feel like you're more in control of the day-to-day stuff, but then the days go by so
Mhm.
fast and it's over. So that's kind of the mentality he feels like should be cultivated right now in order to get this team out of a rut right now is just have more of a sense of desperation and appreciation for the moment, and that will carry you through. And that's
Of
usually, I
course.
mean, it's hard to argue with that because it feels like that's what's carried a lot of Creighton teams through is just their sense of urgency for that given day. You know what I mean? How important they feel like that given day is. How much they're willing to put on the line to get that win no matter what. However, if their ankle hurts, if they're not shooting well, if they're um if they're not getting along with their girlfriend or whatever, like however whatever is going on, like basketball creates a situation for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, where you can go into a zone that's not easy to replicate and you never
Mhm.
get that moment back again, but you make the most of it when it happens. And that's like what creates that memory that's everlasting, right? Right now, this team still has a chance to create those memories that they wanted to create, those moments that first time, doing this and that. They still have a chance to do all that, but they have to take
Mhm.
advantage of the day-to-day stuff. And that's kind of what feels like it's falling off, like maybe in pursuit of these bigger goals, they lost sight of the process in the first place. Maybe that's why they're on a 6 game losing streak right now. So somehow, some way, they have to figure out how to center themselves again and figure out how to get 1% better each day, which is kind of the motto of an athlete, of a grinder, of a hard worker, right? Is get 1% better each day. And at the end of it, you'll be able to accomplish the things you wanted to accomplish in a big picture sense. So that's kind of where they're at right now. But it feels like just take a snapshot of these 3 games. It feels like these 3 games are going to be have a definitive impact on the rest of the season because I can't see any way that this turns into a 7 or 8 or 9 game losing streak and then all of a sudden they figure it out at UConn this
Oh,
year. You know what I'm saying? Well, I think once you forget how to win, you just forget how to win. Like it just becomes a thing
my
where it spirals out of
heart.
control. I'm
I
sorry.
oh,
I'm sorry.
my heart. For those of you who are just listening to the audio right now, my heart just gave out as Matt just said that out loud. The prospect of it being a 7, 8, 9 game.
I mean, it's a
I don't even
reality.
know what
It's a
I don't even
reality.
know what I would do.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
God. My heart just sunk in my chest. Literally, for those of you who are going to be watching the video, you're definitely going to get to see what I just well, as grim as things look, obviously, if the Jays win this next game, it's going to feel a little bit,
Yeah.
brighter, and it's going to feel brighter again if they're able to win two in a row. And if they're able to, survive this homestand, winning three games in a row, going on to the road, we're going to have a totally different perspective this time next week. So again, it is the pendulum that is forever swinging in college basketball, and that's just kind of the way that it goes. But
Yep.
I certainly appreciate you taking time out to break all these things down with me because, like I said, as a super biased member of the media that's covering the Jays, this is maybe the toughest podcast that I had to do, and I wouldn't want
You're
to have to do with anybody but you, brother.
don't worry about it. I'm always a pleasure to come on and calm you down. It's not about bias, it's about investment. You're invested. That's what you are.
I'm too
Yeah.
invested, is what it is. I'm like,
Maybe too, yeah,
oh,
probably too invested for your own health, but yeah,
I was about to
invested
give a
nonetheless.
Bitcoin analogy, and I don't even want to do that right
Dude, yeah. Especially with me on the podcast. I'll sign off. You can go ahead.
Matt, I appreciate you, brother. Make sure to like and subscribe to the Field of 68 Media Network for content such as this. This has been another episode of the Welcome to the J podcast. I am your host, Jahenns Manigat. This has been my guest, Matt DeMarinis. Matt, any last words for Jays fans out there? Any light at the end of the tunnel that you want to extend to the fans?
Oh, geez. Well, one of Greg McDermott's favorite sayings is it's never as good as you
Bad
think
as
it
it
is,
is,
but
and
it's
it's
never
never
as
as
bad
good
as you
as
think it is.
it's somewhere
Yeah.
in the middle.
See, Jahenns knows. See, he's heard it a lot. So yeah,
I've heard
so
it too
get so
often.
take that sense into your next game against Butler here. Everybody stay safe because it's cold as a mother outside right now. We're getting like
Yeah.
Canadian weather in Nebraska right now, so Jahenns
I
will
heard
probably go out in
Omaha's
short
not doing too
sleeves.
great right now.
Yeah.
It's been pretty nice in Austria. When it snows here, it doesn't stick. The wind is kind
Okay.
of in your face. Austria's, or Vienna, I should say, is low-key kind of like the windy city of Europe. It's got a little bit of Chicago vibes to it, but it's not nearly
Okay.
as cold. So I've been kind of blessed.
So
So
being a
I feel sorry
Canadian,
for you.
thank you. I feel your sympathy. Being a Canadian kid, what's the coldest you'll go out in short sleeves? Like, be honest with me. How much can you handle? How tough are you? Like,
Oh
because obviously
no,
you're battle tested, but
I'm battle tested, but being a Canadian kid, we respect the weather. So
oh,
we don't
okay.
even pull I mean, I'm talking Celsius right now. We don't even pull it's only 0 degrees Celsius out. I could still wear
Oh,
shorts. Absolutely not. We're bundled up. I don't remember a Halloween where my Spider-Man mask wasn't underneath a big parka. So it's all good. It's all good.
love it.
Man, can't wait to have you back on the show. We're definitely going to schedule something for later on in the season. I need to come back on one of your podcasts or Scurry in the
Yes,
Scrub for
sir.
sure. Like I need to make an
See, we're
appearance.
7 hours. We're 7 hours apart, so it's hard to figure out the
That's
the
always
right
the
time frame.
toughest
But
part.
we'll figure it out for sure, though. Eventually,
Well,
we'll
I
get
know you
there.
do post game stuff, and I guess the toughest part for me is because I have to stay up till 4:30. Basically, is when most Jays games end.
Right.
So for me to line up
And
at
you're a
five
professional
thirty,
athlete, so I have to respect the body clock. Exactly.
for me to
That
stay up
rest
at
is valuable.
5 a.m. is
Hmm.
very tough for me. And then usually we
Yeah.
have like 10 a.m. practices. Like that's kind of been my battle. But hey, like you said, I'm emotionally invested. I'm spiritually invested in the Jays and all things Creighton. So it's been a tough month to say the least. But
Hopefully for
I
your
guess
hopefully for your
as far
mental
as
health,
Creighton
they have some
basketball is
wins
concerned,
ready.
it's been a tough month, but everything else has been pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. We're doing pretty well out here.
Oh
So
yeah.
Jays, you guys are the last part of my life that I need. So come on. Let's get it together, boys. If not for yourself, do it for me, please. I'm begging.
Lovely plea to end it.
Oh,
I love
all
it.
right. I appreciate you as always. Again, follow, subscribe, share the Philly 68 Media Network. And until next time, I've been your host, and we will see you later. As always, go Jays.